A voice in the dark. They didn't kill them on the platform, Lee said, as she leaned forward and stared down a sheer drop of at least 40 feet. A ceremony was performed here, at the top. Maybe organs were harvested. Maybe it was all about blood. Then, she whistled like a bomb falling, ending with a squishy splat. Some might have been killed from the drop. Some might have lived and tried to climb out. Lee pointed out one of the skeletons halfway out of the pit below. Look, arms reaching out, fighting for it, killing each other to live. Coming out of a daze, she spun to face Jeff, sitting a few yards away, with his eyes and a pencil buried in a sketchbook, drawing the massive statue atop the column for what must have been the 50th time. Cheery bunch, he said without turning around to face her. Lee sighed with a deep anger. You serious right now? Jeff's constant sketching and incessant cold shoulder had gotten old yesterday. The temporary lights he'd moved inside the cavern allowed them to study it more closely, and without the constant fear of rolling an ankle in the floor indentations. But getting power into the temple had taken an entire day of hard work, a day wasted in Lee's eyes. That was 2 hard days ago. Since then, they had not found any new passages or artifacts, and she was running out of ideas and excuses. Trying to ignore Jeff's disinterest, she returned to cataloging the skeleton pit. These weren't sacrifices to appease a god, or gods whatsoever. It's as though it wasn't about the death. It was about the pain being caused. It was about the punishment. Jeff said only, People used to sacrifice other people. Shitty business. That's the way it goes. Luckily, they're not alive to feel it now. But this is the worst we've seen, by a lot. These people, I don't want to know how someone like that thinks, Lee said. Jeff replied. Lee faced him and waited impatiently. That's all? What am I supposed to say? Literally anything else. You could start by showing some enthusiasm for your work. Jeff waved his arms, shaking the pencil and paper, feigning a rousing cheer. Smartass. She was seconds from screaming at him. All she wanted to do was focus on the damn temple, the most important thing to happen in her career, possibly her entire life. The cave was purpose, the rarest of archaeological finds, all to herself. Yet now, she could only think about what to say to the only person she had left in the world. He was upset. She knew that. The nights had been straining, and they hadn't slept together the last 2. She remembered waking up in the middle of the previous night to find Jeff had moved to his own tent, and she didn't miss his warmth the rest of the night for survival's sake. If he was hurting, she was. It had gotten that far, much faster than she'd anticipated, or ever let happen before. Ever since Casey had left with crates containing the dagger and all 3 black stones, Jeff had been acting different, distant, and bitter, constantly complaining about stomach aches, similar to what Casey had experienced. During nights at camp, Lee and Jeff researched statues, symbols, and art throughout history, but so far nothing matched their temple, or the great statue of the beast within, whose wings shared a resemblance with those of Western dragons, but were nowhere near as refined or majestic as the classic image that came to mind. The flesh between its long, slender phalanges had so many torn holes it was hard to imagine they could carry such a broad creature, whose thick body and trunk legs reminded Lee of a rhinoceros or a fat dog. Presently, she yawned, exhausted, more physically than mentally. The professor of archaeology had all the energy in the world for activities like finding a new chamber or some goddamn writing, but managing human connections was a high bandwidth activity. Even the great Lee Evans needs food and rest. Give it up, sunshine. She closed the notebook, stood, and stretched. You about ready to call it a day? She said, trying to sound amiable. Jeff nodded and rose to grab his backpack. They walked in silence, passing through the temple entrance, down the dead stairs, and onward toward the surface, each taking glances at the other when they weren't looking.
Really wish he would say something.
Zipping up her coat when they reached the cave exit, Lee pulled her collar high over her neck, protecting her from the frigid wind coursing through the canyon like an icy river. As the canyon opened to a wide berth, the gusts in the canyon became warm compared with those raging over the camp plateau. Marching behind Jeff, using his frame as a shield, she wished they could walk side by side, huddled together. He probably did too, but neither would be the first to admit it.
I know I won't.
Trudging up the final hill, they watched their sordid camp come into view, its empty tents swaying violently, windows and entrances flapping and flailing. Seeing the camp so desolate made Lee think of Casey, and how she missed her more every day. A small glimpse of the setting sun on the horizon was obscured behind gray clouds as she and Jeff trudged into camp. Breaking away, she marched up the hill toward her tent, hearing him follow. When she stepped inside out of the wind, Jeff waited at the entryway. "What you want to eat?" he asked. Lee emptied her pockets and started a gas lamp. "I'm not hungry." "Gotta eat something." She could tell he was aching to be invited in.
Strange he thinks he needs to be.
"When did I ask you to take care of me?" She sat down with her notes at the table, ignoring him.
Starting now.
Jeff remained a moment in the doorway, where she could feel him watching her scribble. Eventually, he came to his senses, stepped in, and sat down on the cot, not saying anything at first, rubbing and blowing air on his cold hands. Lee kept ignoring him.
If you're gonna talk, talk.
"So," he finally began, "I've been thinking. We're done, right?" Lee kept jotting notes as if he hadn't uttered a word. "You said you'd stay." "There's nothing else in there. Look at us. What are we doing? The camp's abandoned." "How is it abandoned if we're still here?" "You know what I mean. We're almost out of supplies. We haven't had contact with the outside world in days. What about your mystery backer, huh? Aren't they curious what's going on? I think it's time we bring in someone else. This thing is dead and you know it." Lee jumped to her feet and threw her pencil at the desk hard enough to make Jeff twitch. "Somebody else? Did you have an aneurysm? No one is getting into my sight until I'm done with it." He sat still, his eyes direct, but also tired, and maybe a little sad. Lee didn't budge, and he eventually stood up. Jeff circled the perimeter of the tent, tying down the window flaps one by one, though it did little to subdue the sound. Finishing the last, he turned to face her. "We found nothing new. No more stones, except for some fallen stalactites. Certainly nothing as interesting as the dagger. The site's wasted. Don't you want nice things again? Fuck, I miss nice things. We should go toward 'em, not away." "What's all this we? This isn't your site." "We're a team now, aren't we?" Jeff asked. "No, we have fun, but I'm still your boss, and I say we investigate the site further." "What are you so afraid of? If this is such a great find, fucking show it off. You've earned it. We've all earned it. Especially the chap who lost his eyes for it. Or the others who might have died traipsing through the desert, eh? Do something for them. Because I haven't seen my boss do shite." "I release you," Lee said with a wave of her hand, returning to her notebook and pencil, finding its tip intact, scribbling whatever. "Excuse me? I didn't quite hear that," Jeff said. "I think you did. If this place is so horrible, if what we're doing here is so ethically wrong, quit. Go off and take your little crusade with you. I have a couple of those going myself. Whoever built the temple left clues. Whether or not we're good enough to find them, they did." She caught Jeff's gaze, hoping she might convince him with her eyes.
I know this is the right call. I do.
He sighed and smiled. His brow tightened. "So, That's the way it is? That's the way it is. Lee said it so coldly she surprised herself. I'll be gone in the morning. Good luck, Professor. Hope you find what you're looking for. Jeff made his way to the exit. Don't bother sending my last check, boss. Won't be wanting it. Before she could say anything, he untied the doorway flap and ducked out.
Fine. Leave like that. See if I care.
Lee slammed her book closed and started getting ready for a few hours' rest. For whatever reason, that night was the coldest of the entire 3-month dig. The deafening howls of the wind creeping through the openings in the tent windows and entryway, knocking over anything not already knocked over, were impossible to ignore. Lee listened to the white noise symphony for hours. Sleep never came.
Why can't Jeff see the bigger picture? This is something amazing. The world will be talking about this, and it can be ours. As long as we're the ones to unlock its secrets, it will be ours. We could have gone anywhere afterward, been together for as long as we wanted.
Her scattered thoughts suddenly landed on the workers and their faces following the camp riot. How scared they'd been. Lee had been here longer than anyone, and so far had no desire to pluck anyone's eyes from their sockets.
Shit like that is what keeps us living like cavemen.
Another hour went by, and she was still conscious, though the screaming wind in the canyons had been reduced to a hush, and the tent flaps had gradually slowed until they lay still. Sand fell from the sky and settled on the plains like a mist of rain. She concentrated on dozing off, hoping to utilize the new quiet. However, after a few minutes, the sound of someone marching up the hill became clear. Heavy footsteps.
Only Jeff's boots could make that sound.
Also, the sound of small chains rattling. The steps reached the tent entrance and stopped. Jeff's silhouette stayed on the fabric just outside the door, waiting for a good 30 or 40 seconds, doing nothing.
Probably thinking about how to apologize.
When the entrance flap finally opened, Lee shut her eyes to pretend to be asleep, hoping he would think she was at total peace after their fight. The flap shut, and she squinted to take a peek. But it was too dark to see anything other than a big dark fuzzball moving toward her. She hoped he wouldn't say anything stupid, and would simply get into bed with her, hold her close, and apologize for what he had said. But after a minute or two, she felt nothing. There was not so much as the sound of anyone breathing. She opened her eyes a bit, not seeing the tent, nor Jeff, but a stark white face with thin dark eyes, attached to an enormous shadowed figure dressed in black and gray rags. Rocketing back, she reached across her cot and grabbed the baseball bat, stashed away for just this kind of thing. "Who are you? Why are you in my tent?" she shouted, gripping the bat so hard her hands cramped.
Jeff, where are you? I know you heard that.
The figure in black remained in place, seemingly watching with curiosity. The mask floated in the darkness, darting randomly from one side to another, as a low, wet, gravelly voice crept up. A man's, churning Lee's insides.
"We wish to thank you."
Jeff finally arrived, calling out as he charged up the hill. His shadow fell on the tent. "Lee, where are you?" Dashing inside, he immediately went after the masked stranger, his equal in size, tackling them, though they stood as strong as a pillar. Lee couldn't see much more than limbs and bodies flailing, and a glimpse of Jeff's arms wrapped up with the figure before disappearing in a flood of black. Jeff roared over the tussle, while the masked man remained silent as a whisper, save the rattling of his wrist chains. Lee then heard the horrible crack of bones breaking, and Jeff screaming.
The fuck are you? What's happening to us?
Rushing in with the baseball bat, she swung as hard as she could, landing it with a loud thud in the masked man's lower spine. But he did not move, or flinch, or cry out in pain. Instead, He turned and pulled away the cloak near his legs, revealing Jeff, frozen, clutched by a vice grip on his lower neck. His eyes were wide, his mouth twitching intermittently. Blood dripped beneath the masked man's fingertips, where long, sharp nails protruded through his gloves. Lee reeled back to strike again, halting when the masked stranger tightened his hold on Jeff. "Let him go!" The stranger in the mask was so calm and still, he didn't even appear to be breathing.
We will let this one go if you give us what we seek.
Lee eyed Jeff, unable to tell if he was paralyzed or simply in too much pain to move. His arm was a deep purple and gray, twisted, hanging like an empty coat sleeve. "Okay, what do you want?" asked Lee.
It is found here by you,
the masked man said plainly. Jeff's mouth twitched. A stream of blood rolled out. He was turning white. Don't listen, Lee. "You're killing him. Let him go," she shouted. The masked man remained calm.
He will not die if we are given what we came for.
"I don't know what you want." Jeff fought more words out.
He means the dagger.
"It's not here. Let him go," Lee demanded.
Harmful lies are a wonderful source of wrath,
the man said as his grip around Jeff's neck tightened, forcing his eyes to roll back into his head.
Continue.
"Listen," Jeff coughed out.
What you want isn't here.
The mask shifted back and forth between Jeff and Lee.
You believe that is truth, but we know what we sense. If you are useless...
He lifted his hand over Jeff's skull. Lee lurched forward, hands splayed out. "Wait!" The masked man stayed his hand. The white mask turned toward Lee. With a mounting sense of remorse, she moved to her cot and grabbed her backpack.
What are you doing?
Jeff asked. "Here." Lee unzipped the bag and pulled out the dagger made of obsidian metal from the temple, presenting it to the man in the mask. "Take it and go."
For the love of God.
"Lee?" "Quiet, Jeff." The masked man reached out and took the dagger.
Ah, yes,
he said.
Do you have any idea what this is?
"No. Please go," she said.
This is the blade of the Monarchs, the breaker of barriers. You can't even imagine the wonders it can accomplish. Alas,
He tossed the dagger to the side.
it is not what we seek. Where are the brothers?
Lee's gut plummeted. "I thought you wanted the dagger. What brothers are you talking about? The temple is empty." The masked man reached out and opened his left palm.
Give us the stones, girl.
The stones? Impossible. How could he know about them?
Jeff's eyes stayed on her as she stood, holding her backpack, hoping he would pass out before he saw what he was about to see. She reached into her bag. "No," Jeff sighed, as if taking his last breath. Lee revealed the smallest stone, shimmering like satin. The masked man gasped, filling his lungs with fluid. "Lee? Why did you—" Jeff started, his eyelids sinking like lead weights, pulling his head down with them.
Where are the others? Let us see them. Put them together.
The masked man growled. "They're gone, like I told you," she said.
He is alone? You're telling us you separated them?
Lee trembled as she moved toward Jeff and the attacker, about to hand the stone over when his scratchy breathing halted. She froze. "What do you want with the stones?" she asked.
You separated the brothers?
The masked man bellowed so loudly the tent shook, as though the icy desert winds had returned.
You cannot!
Lee's body, weakened by the sound, dropped the stone at her feet. The masked man roared once more before Lee saw Jeff's head jerk to the side and his body convulse for a split second before going limp. The man in black yanked his hand upward, and with it came a flurry of blood and bone. The mess splattered across the tent walls and himself. Remnants of Jeff's spine hung limply from the man's hands. Lee felt her insides shrivel up. She went numb, even though she was screaming. But the sounds were simply impulses. She was empty. In a flash, she was hammering at the man with the bat, swinging wildly, hitting nothing but air. The masked man's hand shot out like a snake, grabbed the weapon, and took her by the back of the neck, burying her face in the dirt near the stone. The deep maroon and gray swirls within the rock seemed to be dancing. She could see Jeff on the other side, his eyes gaping in terror.
Look at him. Can you tell what his last thought was? We heard betrayal in his voice and felt nothing but despair when he joined the Eve. He was afraid for you. We want you to remember this in your future.
Leaning down, his mask landing a hair from Lee's ear, the man whispered,
We wish to thank you. All that will be unto this earth from now until the end will be from your own hands. Know this, for it is you who is blessed.